Hey there, welcome back to another video. Today I want to talk a little bit about serialized stories versus shorter stories. Before I get into that, just want to speak a little bit about the piece you see being drawn today. This is page 19 of my comic, Trailblazers Man's Mission. In this page, I really appreciated how I came up with the ambiance in the first two panels, which was a perfect segue into the explosive panel 3 and allowed for the tone of the story thus far to shift into something that is more action-oriented. Now, not everything on this page is perfect. I don't think I nailed the sound effects the way I wanted to, and I was just experimenting to see if sound effects behind the characters would work, but it's not very legible, so unfortunately that didn't work as intended, but I'm glad I experimented with it all the same. Now, back to the topic at hand. So when I first came on to YouTube looking to create a story, I was very inspired by manga at the time, and ended up finding a lot of like-minded individuals who also were inspired to create a manga, and they were posting about their progress online. Now, one thing I noticed in hindsight is that all of us seemed to be aiming for the same thing, which was a similar product to what Japan was producing through things like Shonen Jump, a long-running, long-form, serialized manga project. And being as heavily influenced by manga as I personally was, of course I wanted to do something very similar. I wanted to create a multi-volume epic that lasted at least as long as maybe a Fullmetal Alchemist, which was about 20-ish volumes, and definitely wanted to get closer to something like a Naruto, a Bleach, or even a One Piece. And this thought stayed with me for nearly 2 decades, until I finally went out and created a comic. Upon completing Trailblazers Man's Mission, I realized I kind of had it backwards. Serializations ended up giving me an excuse to not really think through what the story was actually going to entail, like what was going to happen between events. I was all gung-ho about world building or creating characters, designing characters, and saying, oh, this is going to happen to this character and this is the character arc they're going to go through. But not once did I actually say, okay, how is the character going to go through those things? What events lead them from point A to point B to point C? And instead, I found myself wasting time daydreaming about scenarios that would happen in my story, like epic moments, really cool fights. And that was actually more fun, because every time I sat down to work on the story, I always felt frustrated with those because of lack of skill, or maybe because something wasn't coming out the way that I wanted to, or maybe I reread something that I had done and I didn't quite like it as much as the first time I had written it down. And so I would spend more time actually thinking about things that I wasn't doing than actually doing the work. And when I actually completed my comic in 2024, looking back, I actually really enjoyed the time that I was working on the comic more than all the time I had been daydreaming about the comic prior. Firstly, the daydream stopped because when I am immersed in the process, I'm really focused on the process and I'm really appreciating just the result of what's coming out of that. It's why I can look back on this comic, and despite it having quite a few flaws, I'm still very satisfied about the experience I had creating it. And this experience has led me to decide to actually focus on telling shorter stories from now on, whether it's just short one-shots or just individual books in like a graphic novel form, or even a series of illustrations, or even one illustration. Just shorter bursts of telling stories. I think it suits me better because of 2 reasons. So the first reason is a lot of what I am inspired by outside of manga is actually not that long. Some examples: Lord of the Rings. It's The Hobbit plus 3 books. Yeah, there's a lot of lore books you can get into, and there's an expanded universe, and there's more literature that you can read, but the core story is in 4 books. And they tell a complete story that's really, really good. Another example is The Chronicles of Narnia. 7 books gives me everything I need, and I enjoyed my time with that thoroughly. Yet another example, Harry Potter. Very much enjoyed the books. I actually read them very, very voraciously when I first got introduced at the age of 10. And so on and so forth. Now, manga has been a big part of my life since I was a teenager. I will not deny that. But if I were to weigh them on a scale, the novels I read when I was young versus the manga I was reading throughout my entire life, I'm actually surprised, even myself, that the novels hold more weight in my mind. Not to downplay manga at all. I think manga is wonderful, and it has provided a lot of good inspiration for me story-wise as to what's possible in this medium. But I find myself called back to my roots of reading novels and enjoying the stories that are told there and how things are built in a novel setup. And I want to bring that into the comics I create. A more direct comparison to novels is light novels. I really like light novels, but I don't like how sometimes they can drag, or they can get really zoned in on events instead of pushing the narrative forward. So a narrative that would have been straightforward usually gets pushed and extended and milked, I guess you could say, to get all the value out of it, because a lot of light novels are based off of a gimmick idea, at least right now. And there are quite a few light novels that aren't, but just to serve my point, the novels I've read, the ones that I really care about, they're not about milking the story, they're about communicating an idea. And it's a strong idea, and it's resonated with me and stuck with me basically my entire life. So I want to try and emulate that more. Another thing that kind of brings me to decide to actually go for shorter stories is I actually really enjoy complex character designs. In fact, artistically, I find myself more drawn to video game art and video game character design than I do manga character design. I go to manga for stories. I really appreciate the stories that are told in manga, but I go to video games for art. Almost all of my favorite artists are artists that have worked on video games, like Tetsuya Nomura, Kingdom Hearts, and Final Fantasy, and I believe it's Shigenori Soejima for Persona, and Metaphor, which has been a really fun game so far. The Fire Emblem artists in particular, I don't know their name, but the one for Three Houses really speaks to me. And when I really try to put the same list together for manga, it just doesn't come together. Like, I can maybe say Masashi Kishimoto, but it's not really the art that I'm interested in, it's the way the story was told. And along with complex designs, I feel like my aesthetic naturally tends towards that. What do I mean by my aesthetic? The art that I like producing is art that is more complex in nature, which is kind of funny because a lot of my earlier designs for Kenden Fai, even from Trailblazers Man's Mission, were exceedingly complex to the point where I had to dumb it down, because at that point I thought Trailblazers would be a serialization or a serialized comic with multiple volumes. I now know better, and I also know that if I have to create a serialization, I may be stuck with simplifying designs to a point where it loses the fun of actually creating a character design for me. This isn't something that I realized in the moment of creating Trailblazers Man's Mission, but I think retrospectively, looking back, I wish that I hadn't simplified the designs as much as I did. Even though I like the designs, I think that I wanted to, in the future, continue to make complex designs for all my projects. As examples, I really like armor, and I want to create a lot of fantasy armor sets for the characters that are the main characters in any one of my projects. And not just even armor, weaponry, and even magically infused spaces, or spaces that look like there's like a magical vibe to them. Very complex designs and environments. That's not stuff that I could do if I had to draw a lot in a quick amount of time. And the other thing that kind of plays into this is speed. So I naturally want to get faster at my craft because I just think about efficiency, in the sense that I don't have a whole lot of time to draw because I have other obligations and other things I want to do with my life. As much as I love art, I also want to experience other things. So efficiency plays an important role in doing what I want to do. But if I were to create a serialization, efficiency wouldn't just be a nice to have, it would be a necessity. And I don't want to force myself into a space where I feel pressure to create constantly in order to retain readership maybe, or in order to get things out faster just so that I can keep the story going. I'd rather take my time and develop things in the way that suits me best and helps me to enjoy the process more thoroughly. So to summarize everything that I just mentioned, basically, I feel like short stories are the direction I'm going to go in, or at least condensed stories that aren't really focused on serialization and more focused on telling a complete story in as few volumes as possible. If it's just one, perfect, and if it's just a couple, that's fine too. I think short stories will help me incorporate more complex designs and more ambitious things into the stories that I create, and I think it'll also help me focus more on the ideas I want to communicate through my stories to an audience. In this way, I also feel that my artistic voice will come out in the way that I personally want it to come out, and that's how people will come to know me as a creative. And no shade to the Japanese manga industry. I love it. I will continue to consume content from it. It will always inspire me. I just don't feel pigeonholed or married to the idea of creating a serialized manga project anymore. I'm moving on from that. I'm just choosing to create in the way that I feel is most appropriate for my life. My stories will pay homage to my influences, they will communicate my ideas, and it will be in the way that I want it to be. And that's all I got for this video. Thank you so much for watching if you did. Question for you: do you prefer writing and creating longer stories or shorter stories, and why? Leave those answers in the comments down below. I'm very curious. And a quick announcement, actually, Trailblazers Man's Mission is live again online. You can find it at my ArtStation. I'll leave a link to my account in the description down below. If you don't mind, I'd really appreciate if you gave it a read and left feedback either on this video or on ArtStation itself. And of course, if you like the video and want to see where I end up going with this newfound perspective on shorter stories and smaller projects, give me a like, and also feel free to subscribe. I'd really appreciate that. All right, stay safe, stay happy, stay creative, and I'll see you all in a little bit. Peace.